crystals can grow inside of bones or any organic formation and be a fossil. And a crystal grows from a potential. So is a potential a thing of the past? No, because it hasn't happened yet. But if a crystal is growing inside of something to become a fossil, it's the best of both worlds. It's these variances that allows you to experience an array of differences. The real world, through your genetics being the most random number generators that are stable. For the most part, the body regulations are not needing overcompensations. How instrumental abrasive surfaces are is if you're crash landing on a crash course. The difference of a fossil and rotting is inside of the fossil if it's rotting, at which point is different than a crystal. When you go against the grain, it's like a giant speed bump. But if you have giant speed bumps aligned with you, you're going with the grain. This is what on ski slopes, after they're groomed, you're able to utilize the grain. Another way that this is in a relation to going with the grain is a ball that goes down a slide. If it's waving up and down, that ball will reach its end destination quicker than a ball on a slope straightaway. If you live next to a sewer, it might be something that smells fishy if that sewer is connected to a bad sewage plant. If you catch my drift. And so to be infinitely clear how potentials are exploited is how two bodies can be explosive. For example, if you kick really hard, you're kind of like a horse. But if you kick really, really hard, it's like a horse's hoof, if it was sharpened, would be equivalent to a shark's bite. If you're doing a bicycle kick, like Liu Kang. If you're doing a bicycle kick in the air and it's continuously over like 10 feet, where you're just kicking, this is what, it's like a 50-pound shark traveling like 20 miles per hour and then hitting its jaw on something and biting accurately. The jaw is like 90 pounds per square inch. So that will mess someone up just as hard as if a horse was having giant sharp hooves, like Edward Scissorhands, but his hooves were giant metal sharp cleavers the size of hoofs, and it was just doing its horse's kick like a doggy paddle, but at someone really hard. That would be all equivalent to what Liu Kang could do to someone's body. So it's kind of like an engine, except it's a circuit. So it's instead of like horsepower, it was watts. There's a certain amount of watts that are in a lightning bolt. So in science, they found that when you yell at a wall, it echoes back with a lower frequency. It means that light has a unique characteristic of a wave as well as is a frequency, and if it's bouncing back from a wall at a lower frequency, you've lost watts. And so it's just like your engine is compensating for all the crystal growth until it just solidifies and starts heating up and then breaks a cylinder. Another way that crystal growth is represented is in the wave function also. When you shoot X-rays, stuff such as a copper plate, the electrons show differently because they run away. And this is what crystal growth is. So the spectrum of X-rays, when shot at specifics, objects like metals Similar to copper, the electrons will not radiate the same wavelengths that you're shooting at it. They will escape and start shooting out in all different directions, just as a crystal growing at different rates of the potential of the unbalanced chemical of liquid or gas going into solid. And this is because the electrons are not stable in similarities of crystal growth attributes. And when you're shooting radiation at metal like copper, you're breaking the system that it is cast at by conducting it with radiation. The electrons go into the atoms and then they're not stable, so they shoot out because they're both runaway uncertainties. So crystal growth is from the change of gas or liquid into a solid. And then crystal growth, it can happen through two main rows or more than two rows. If it's more than two rows, then it will have a pattern where the peaks have more deconstruction between them versus two rows where it'll be more arbitrary. So I say crystal growth is arbitrary just because the potentials to locate how it formed from the difference of liquid and gas, you would have to look at every single atom and measure the amount of electron escape or capture that went into the energy that changed the molecular bond. And that's arbitrary in the crystal growth because you can't locate every single atom. Just by picking it apart would make the entire crystal growth structure a different one. But in a vehicle, if you look at the cylinders where it broke, the specific placements on it will show the differentiation of the tension that was exerted if you're to match it up with the timing belt and the transistors mission. And this is in crystal growth what is called cryptography, because the surface of crystals are able to be read when you shoot in radiation. They diffract inwards. This is the cryptography of a crystal. It gives a encryption, which is the opposite of shooting radiation into a metal, because that would be conducting it, so it would be scrambling the encryption. The exact opposite is the solid crystal structure versus a metal. Doing the same action, they do the opposite. Or kind of like an open heart surgery. Once that happens and it's opened, some people never feel the same because it isn't the same. One of the most stable things is a respiratory system, and if that is cracked open, that's just as bad as a transmission opening, because it will never be set correctly from the initial enclosure. So when the printing press was first made, this was revolutionary because everything had to be handwritten before that. In modern day, semiconductor and transistors are the new printing press. This is because they can emulate the information better than a printing press or a handwriting. However, that's been used to overlook how the particles are interacting by exploiting the potentials of the interactions. And this is able to be looked over because for the last century, everything's been reasonably stable in the arrangements of atoms in bodies. The ability to decrypt a crystalline structure It'd involve knots, and this would be as though if a 3D printer could accurately print out origami. The coding in that structure would be almost as if it were handwritten and emulated perfectly in a printing press, but the handwriting would be of the particles' potentials. Luckily, this is what genes are embedded as, so it's almost as if it's already there. Figure out how to handle a potential's decrypting mechanism. This could be done with a vacuum and turbine dynamic, inclusive of how O-rings are cracked like cylinders in engines when the transmission is new and not aligned with the time. Or kind of like an open heart surgery. Once that happens and it's opened, some people never feel the same because it isn't the same.